Casey. This is Keystone Curiosity, where we talk about all things unique to the state of Pennsylvania. And today, it's Groundhogs Day.
Located in the midwestern part of the state between Pittsburgh and State College, Punxsutawney, Pennsylvania is the living example of continuing an old legend into the modern day.
The exact origin of Groundhogs Day isn't really known, but it is generally understood that the tradition goes back to pre-medieval Europe, where multiple different cultures held the specific time of year in significance.
February 2nd falls roughly halfway between the winter solstice and the spring equinox, making it significant for the Celts, who celebrated Imbolc, a festival to honor the goddess Brigid and mark the start of the lambing season. The same rough date also marks the festival of Candlemas in Catholic or Lutheran worship, which is the feast of purification of the Blessed Virgin. But the modern-day legend of shadows wouldn't take root until the Middle Ages. There was a belief that hibernating animals like badgers and bears would interrupt their slumber on this day to check the weather. The legend goes that if the animal saw its shadow, they would return to their dens for 6 more weeks. But if the day was cloudy and no shadow could be seen, it was a sign of milder weather and an early spring to come. When immigrants came across the Atlantic to America, they would bring with them this legend, only modifying it slightly. The dense primordial forests of Pennsylvania made casual sightings of bears and badgers almost non-existent. And if you did go knocking on their door asking about the weather, you were usually met with the same kind of welcome as political canvassers nowadays. As such, local farmers would substitute the angrier, more reclusive animals with one that was far less aggressive and more easily found pillaging their gardens and burrowing under their outbuildings: groundhogs.
The earliest documented instance of this replacement actually comes from a journal entry on February 2nd of 1840 from a man named James L. Morris in Morgantown, Pennsylvania.
Today, the Germans say the groundhog comes out of his winter quarters, and if he sees his shadow, he returns in and remains there 40 days. While these traditions and legends had been expanding across the sea and into the frontiers of America, it would still be another 40 years before the beginning of the celebration that we know today. Somewhere near Punxsutawney, sometime in the 1880s, the seer of seers, sage of sages, prognosticator of prognosticators, and weather prophet extraordinaire was born. And though he did not reveal his name until the 1960s, Phil would make his media debut in 1887. While Groundhog's Day had been recognized in Punxsutawney the year prior, Phil would step up to provide the town with his predictions on February 2nd, 1887. That year marked the first official trek to Gobbler's Knob, a small knoll 2 miles outside of town. There, the first members of what would become the Inner Circle met with Phil, who, upon venturing out of his burrow, saw his shadow and went back to bed, for 6 more weeks of winter were surely coming.
Since that day, Punxsutawney Phil has delivered his predictions every year with 100% accuracy. Whoa, hold on. So, you mean to tell me that a groundhog with an average lifespan of only 6 years has been doing this for the past 138 and without making a single mistake? Well, yeah. Bullshit.
The secret to Phil's immortality lies in a special concoction called groundhog punch. The effects of this elixir of life are actually only temporary. It really only adds another 7 years. But when it is drunk annually, the result is eternal. And no, it does not work on humans. And in regards to your doubts on his abilities, despite his command of interpreting weather signs, Phil doesn't actually speak English. Instead, he speaks groundhogese to the president of the Inner Circle, who is granted an understanding of the language through possession of a special wooden cane. The president then translates the prediction to the VP, who announces the forecast to the awaiting crowd. Phil's prediction is never wrong. But in translating to another language, sometimes the subtle nuances are misinterpreted by the Inner Circle, which results in a roughly 35 to 40% accuracy. Over the course of the first 100 years or so, Groundhog's Day in Punxsutawney had grown from a localized handful of folks to being known all across the state, and drew in about 2,000 people by the early 1990s. And that number would drastically increase nearly tenfold practically overnight.
But how does an event like this go from a few thousand people to over 10,000 annually? Short answer, Bill Murray.
The 1993 film Groundhog's Day, directed by Harold Ramis and starring Bill Murray, was a massive success. The film brought in over $105 million and would end up winning a BAFTA award for Best Original Screenplay. Beyond all that was the effect it had on the views of Groundhog's Day and Punxsutawney Phil all across the nation. Starting the year after the film's release, crowds and weather stations from all across the country came in droves to catch a glimpse and a prediction from the world's oldest and most experienced weather forecaster. So many folks, in fact, that nowadays the town has buses that act as a shuttle service to and from multiple locations to accommodate the 10,000 to 20,000 people who show up for the sunrise celebration.
I ended up making the effort to go last year and kind of went into it with the same mentality that you hear a lot of people talk about Times Square for New Year's Eve. That whole, yeah, it was a really cool experience, but I wouldn't bother to do it again. And I was pleasantly surprised to find that I was wrong.
While the gates to Gobbler's Knob opened at 2:30, I myself didn't get there until about half an hour before the prediction at around 7:15. And while I was at the back of the crowd and didn't really get a good view of the ceremony, it did mean that I didn't have to stand around in the cold for 4 hours, and I still managed to get close enough after to get a good picture and see Phil for myself. But the part that I really liked was the time I spent in town. Punxsutawney is absolutely riddled with groundhog mania. Not only is it the place where Phil calls home with his wife, Phyllis, and as of March 2024, their 2 children, but an all-out celebration takes place in the town square. With live music, hot spiked beverages, and chainsaw carving, Punxsutawney is the place that the party really happens. The Inner Circle even hosts a formal groundhog ball and a banquet in the days prior to the main event. There's even entire stores dedicated to Phil and his extraordinary gifts. In every way, this town has embraced and expanded the traditions of old, keeping them alive and ushering them into the future with every bit of the town's identity.
Now, I won't deny you need to suspend just a little bit of disbelief in order to buy into the claims and legends of Punxsutawney Phil and all of the Groundhog Day traditions. But at the end of the day, it's really no different than visiting the Renaissance Fair. It's all about having fun. And in that regard, I had an absolute blast. And I think that comes down to the time that I spent in town at the actual celebration, instead of just bolting for the buses and going home as soon as the prediction was over. And that's my suggestion to you. I highly recommend you take the chance to go. And when you do, make sure you take the time to see the actual heart of Groundhog's Day at the weather capital of the world, with the people who live the legend every single year. That is going to wrap it up for today's episode. Thank you guys so much for watching. As per my usual, if you have any suggestions on where you'd like to see me go next, please feel free to leave them in the comments below. In the meantime, hit that like and subscribe so that you can receive notifications about anything else near Punxsutawney or all across the state of Pennsylvania itself. But in the meantime, y'all have a good one.